this idea for this project sort of began with a whole bunch of my CFO contacts sort of asking questions, ramping up their automation programs, or asking questions about automation. You know, when it used to be like pulling teeth to get them on the phone, right? And now I think it's more than business critical. You're almost behind the curve if you're not involved in automation. And so, you know, I really wanted to put together a whole bunch of nuggets and kind of data points. And after having met you earlier this year and kind of forging this Blue Prism partnership, you know, with my new role at Wonderbots, I really thought you were kind of the perfect person to kind of share some things. So one of the things that they always love, right, and the CFO audience is very keen to understand the relatability with experts and people that they buy into, right? And you know this from your time at BNY. So I thought maybe we'd start with kind of anchoring back to your original role there. You know, maybe talking through what your challenges were, kind of what the problems were that you were trying to solve in that role, and explain how is it that you went from BNY to kind of a SaaS company like Blue Prism. That's kind of a big leap. So I'd love to understand sort of how that went, and then we'll dive into some questions I've prepared for you.
Sure. Well, and thanks, Paul, for being and asking me, and it's great to be here, even in a virtual modality. It's not something that we've done a ton of, but I guess in this new normal, we've been learning our new skills, like how to be able to do this in a semi-natural way in front of our cameras and things. So apologies for any of these glitches that might come up. We'll keep our fingers crossed. It isn't technological. It might be a stammering here or there, or a pit bull may be running in and out of my office. You'll have to.
I'm not alone either, so.
You'll have to pardon him. He's deaf, so I have to give him hand signals to get him to leave and to sit and to be quiet. But he's a big play baby. But that may be the only disturbance. So the role I had, my previous role was the head of transformation for BNY Mellon, or lovingly known also on the street as Boney. And that had 5 different pillars in the transformation effort. And one of those pillars was our automation pillar, which when we started the program, we thought was going to be all about robotics. And as we got into it, about 6 months into it, we realized it was really going to be more around smart technologies. And so most of what we were doing in BNY Mellon with the transformation program in the beginning was all focused, as in most organizations, quite honestly, it's about cost takeout. Mm-hmm. And our focus was to drive around a $2 billion cost takeout over a period of 3 years, which we did significantly cut our cost. And by multiple measures, we overachieved that and across a number of those pillars that we utilized, which was, I headed up everything from our operational footprint of the bank, which spanned across 73 locations. I ran the offshoring operations that we had. I had our cost management effort, which was a separate arm and a separate sleeve as well. I had our automation effort, and I also had our process excellence effort. So, within all of that remit, bringing all those things together in a cohesive way basically formed our transformation toolkit and allowed our businesses to use those tools to help them. And with my background, with our experts, we work with the business to help them transform. As we really began to learn about the automation and the capabilities in the automation world, we found ourselves looking into robotics and RPA. Now, my background previous to this, I've been doing transformations for many, many years. I've been all over the world. And I found when I was working in Russia, I was living there working for Sberbank, I came across Automation Anywhere. And so I began experimenting with the utilization of Automation Anywhere. I bought the program myself, had it on my own desktop, and I began playing around with it and found that it was very simple to use.
And this was before your time? This was before you were tasked with leading the automation at BNY?
Yeah, this was probably, I'm going to say it was probably 5 years before I went to Boney.
Wow.
And I had I'd always been a very good builder of macros, and at one point I was a big utilization believer of things like screen scraping technologies and those things. I've been using screen scraping all the way back to Lotus Notes days. I used to have a team of guys way back in the day that would follow me around, and when I was doing Lean Sigma and Six Sigma work and had teams of people, we'd find things and we would jump and we'd lean out processes, and anything that was left, we'd be looking at being able to automate those using screen scraping technologies, which was a lot of its forerunners to RPA technology.
RPA technology.
And so when I was in Russia, we began experimenting with the utilization of our competitor. And then when I went down to New Zealand and worked down there on a bank transformation project, I began to bring that technology and wanted to use that technology on the transformation project. And then got the phone call to come to BNY. And so when we started to stand up our automation team there, it was one of those things I decided to take a harder look at the RPA world. And because BNY was such a significant player in the overall GSIFI component of the world's economic in the transaction system, we needed to make sure that we were picking the right tool. And so we put out an RFP and we invited all the big players that everybody knows the names of. And I'd never even heard of Blue Prism, quite honestly. Didn't know who they were. And we had created what was then became known in the RPA industry as a questionnaire that lovingly was called the Gauntlet. And I wrote the Gauntlet with two other people, and we asked some very tough questions. One, so much so that one of our competitors chose not to answer it, chose not to be a part of the RFP. And so it came down between Automation Anywhere and Blue Prism. And I actually wrote on an envelope and put the name of the winner in it. And I turned out to be wrong.
Interesting.
And Blue Prism actually won and the way that we ran the RFP was by putting together a horse race. And that horse race was made up of 5 processes. 3 of them were identical, 2 of them were different. And they had very strict criteria by which you had to run the horse race, and was done in a controlled environment. So I began as a Six Sigma guy running a controlled experiment. We could control all the variables. And so it was very much an even race, so that we could make sure that we had a very comparative outcome, and we could see who really was better in all these elements that we had. We had 32 criteria list matrix that we had built. We used 3 different evaluation systems to judge them on, and then we had multiple people switching between who was doing the evaluations on them, so they could have different types of different people looking at the same builders and the same outcomes. So it was very intensive.
And you could really see apples to apples if the comparison of the automations were identical that way. So it's truly having a real comparison. That's a really interesting way to do it. I don't think anybody has time for that anymore.
Very much so. Very much. Yeah. And we got it done in 30 days. So
that's
it was
fantastic.
Very intensive. And we didn't just evaluate the performance, we also evaluated the company.
Right.
Like how easy would they be to work with, and how good what's their interaction like? What are they like personally? Do we think they'd be good mentors and teachers?
Right.
Those guys. So we did a lot of evaluation. So I got to know Blue Prism.
Yeah.
And so over the 3 years, we became in the United States the fastest implementation company they'd ever had. We were also the largest implementation they had in the U.S. in my tenure there, and we were also the very first company that Blue Prism ever had that signed a 1,000 digital worker deal. And so when I left, the reason is because we had a lot of our customers. We were very well known in the market. We were doing lots and lots of conferences and being asked to speak at other banks. When I left, in about a 1.5 year period, we'd already done 72 customer or competitor visits that came into our COE and wanted to see how we were doing this stuff called robotics. And so we also had a number of our customers asking us, could we run their RPA programs for them? would we outsource their stuff to us? So we found out that, gosh, that's something that we could start a business of. And so I wrote up a whole business planning case, took it to my boss. I reported directly into the C-suite, and we proposed it to the COO and the CEO at the time. And it was just something that Bank of New York Mellon was not interested in doing at the time. So I said, well, that's fine. I'm interested in doing it myself. So I decided to leave, and there were changes going on in the organization, so the timing worked out great.
That's
and
fantastic.
So I left, and the day after I left, the CEO of Blue Prism called me and said, what are you going to do? And we had already had a great relationship. And he said, well, I want to buy 4 of your 5 available days for the next X number of months. I said, well, Alistair, it's never good to be locked into one customer. So if I'm going to do that, I really got to get paid. So in case you guys go belly up or something, because, you're not growing at all, which wasn't true at all. They were in growth mode. And,
so you had like awesome cultural rapport with them to begin with, too,
yeah.
It sounds like. It was just like a fit.
We were very much, I guess I was the black sheep of their family at the time. It kind of helps to be, I was customer number 30 when they had 30 employees. So, I really was, I became very, very close to them, and they very much were like my friends. And so when I walked in the door as an advisor to Alistair, the CEO, Alistair Bathgate, and I also was working with the customer office, which was newly founded in the company, and worked with a great, great friend and an unbelievable mentor of mine there, Neil Wright. They about 600 to 700 people, and that was just a little bit shy of 2 years ago. And in that time, we've doubled. We've doubled our customer base, and we've doubled our employee base.
Amazing. Well, there's no question the kind of accolades that Blue Prism has had, and I'm new to understanding Blue Prism. Having joined and really understanding how the partner model works is really, I think, the key differentiator, because it's co-solving problems. And the marketing people in the world would probably slap my hand for saying problems, but the challenges in an organization, right? It's co-solving those problems, and that's one of the things that so many CFOs have been trying to come back to. So before we move on to your time at Blue Prism, I want to go back to your role as when you were kind of thinking through the implementation of RPA. How did you think through what kind of processes made the most sense? What was BNY going to kind of be evaluating ROI on? Was it a payback time period? Did you have to put money back in the organization and in different business units? What was it that kind of formulated the strategy for some of these rookies that maybe haven't implemented? What did you really think through, and kind of how was your methodology laid out? And then we'll get into how you brought in other stakeholders, because I think that partner piece is real important at Blue Prism.
Yeah, so we were a little different all the way around in a number of ways. So one of the things I've always been a massive believer in is the whole idea about speed. I'm a speed freak. I've raced cars at over 200 miles an hour. I started building race cars with my brother many, many years ago. And so speed has always been a differentiator for me. And, there's something about when, people have this thing sometimes, I believe that they believe if you're going fast that, you may not always be taking into consideration all the risks involved. But actually, if you know people who race, or you've been around cars like that, you don't get in a car that drives as minded at 208 miles an hour maximum speed.
I'll take your word for that.
Yeah, unless you feel very, very secure. Because you have to trust that vehicle isn't going to be the cause for putting you into a bad situation where you're over relying upon your own skills to take you out of a bad situation. And so again, it's pretty much the way that the transformation efforts that I've run have always been relying upon bringing results as fast as we can to an organization. And so one of the things that we did is we set a target out. we got started 10 months into our fiscal year, so I was already at a disadvantage.
Yeah.
But we also got started because my CEO thought it'd be a really, really good idea if we built 200 digital workers in those first 10 months. Why he got 200 in his head, I have no idea. And we have a very, very healthy pipeline of ideas. Now, they weren't vetted, but we had lots and lots of ideas. And so what you find out very early on is when somebody hears about robots.
And just to clarify, what you mean by ideas is automatable processes, right?
No. These are just ideas. Most of the time, those ideas could be pretty crappy, right? They could be, this is a process I've always hated to do, right? This is a process that always breaks on us. It doesn't mean it's automatable. And I don't mean that clarification. Yeah, they need a lot of scoping, right? We need to understand, look, mate, you need to standardize this thing before we even automate it. You got a lot of other underlying problems with your data. I mean, there's a number of things that you will want to do before you say, we can automate. The best thing we can do for you is to automate. There are oftentimes processes need maintenance work, or they need housekeeping work before you actually go to automate. The worst thing you can ever do is automate a bad process, and they can be bad for a lot of reasons. And there's other companies out there that are in our space that'll say, we can automate that process, don't worry about it. Well, good luck on that one. You're just going to speed up the production of something very bad, or you're just going to exacerbate the deficiencies in that process, and it's just going to break anyway very fast on you. So it's not something you want to do. The other thing you always have to take in consideration is, just because you're automating, most of the time in the early days, you're never going to automate the entire end-to-end process. You're only automate a component of it. What happens what can happen a lot of times if you're not careful and you don't understand how to look at these processes correctly, or you don't understand the entire value chain, is you'll automate a component of a process or an entire component or the end-to-end process, but they don't take in consideration that automation now is going to run much faster and much more efficiently than the receiver of the downstream. So the process where this is taking the output, maybe they can't handle the speed. They can't handle how many units you're now pushing out the door that you weren't able to do. So their drumbeat is running like this. But now you've automated a process and the drumbeat's running like this. Well, that process probably has no chance in hell of being able to take that. And so you created a bottleneck that never existed before. So all these things have to be taken in consideration. So when I say we had a massive pipeline in that first year, yep, they were all ideas. And that was good because we started an ideation campaign, which talked about, here's all the things that a good process looks like. But that's what we knew back then. We didn't know a whole lot. You were talking about partners. We decided back then we didn't need any partners. We were all super smart. We know how to do this. And by the way, we weren't wrong, because back then the partners didn't know any more than we did.
It was a beginning journey. I think we were all kind of getting our rolling up our sleeves.
Everybody was doing it at the same speed. Now, granted, we did pick up a partner later on to help us with not really the strategic stuff and not really to help us learn how to build things, but we needed more arms and legs because we were growing so fast. And so we did pick up a partner to just help us scale, quite honestly. And we helped train them, quite honestly, because they brought in a whole bunch of new kids, and we trained them with our team in India as well as our team in New York. So, again, that tells you how early on we were. We were actually training one of the big GSI partners, their RPA team. And we get real life hands-on experience, which is very different than what back then. The way a lot of those teams got trained is they would train in-house in the consulting firms, but they would be automating things like with Microsoft. Well, that's not really going to help me when they come into my bank.
Yes.
And they've never seen any of our banking systems or platforms. This way, they got trained in our environments, building automations in our environment with our bank systems and platforms. platforms, and they understood control environments, and they understood risk parameters. They were not going to get that inside of a consulting firm. So when we needed to use them as add-on staff, they became much more important and powerful for us because they got up to speed so much faster.
Yeah, now just that makes perfect sense, and it's something that we definitely see a lot is when I'm talking to a new RPA client, often their question is, do we build or do we borrow, right? Are we gonna rent assets, or are we gonna build this capability internally? And often it's about the amount of automations that you have in your pipeline. So typically it takes the strategy before you can even answer that question.
Absolutely.
And a lot of times I think people get it backwards. We're so used to the mentality of, kind of those GSIs, right? You get the assessment, then you get the project, then you get the implementation, and RPA is sort of a iterative order. It doesn't really work that way. So kind of segueing off of what you said there of some of the ideas that you were getting in this ideation. I love that. I'm going to pick your brain about it some other day. But what I've always often noticed, right, is the clients that I've onboarded typically start in finance. There's a lot of repeatable tasks. There's a lot of stuff that's just kind of goes by the wayside. That Microsoft world is dying as far as like the Excel, but robots really know how to use Excel well, right? And so often what I've been telling my CFO friends is get involved in the RPA process, in the strategy, because ultimately the use cases are probably going to hit your back door to begin with. And what I've been trying to do is evangelize them to be sort of proactive about these IPA programs. So what would your advice be to the bean counter abacus guy, right, sitting there evaluating another investment in technology? What would you advise as far as how to get involved and how to educate themselves on understanding the importance of this technology?
Well, as my former colleague, who now just became very recently the new CEO of Bank of New York Mellon, as Todd and I used to work out together in the same gym in the afternoon, and every time he'd see me, he'd say, "How much longer do I have?" And he was the CFO at the time, and I said, "Todd, nobody can ever cut the jokes. He's got a very dry sense of humor, brilliant man." And I said, "Todd, I don't think I can, automate a CFO's job, especially yours, because I can't teach them how to tell jokes like you do. And nobody could make a freaking annual report or our quarterly reports funny like you do, especially when our results aren't exactly what the street was looking for. You seem to be able to find some, shining sliver of light that gives us a little bit of hope and doesn't kill our stock price so badly." So again, it's always a challenge, I think, for any organization. First off, it starts with having a sponsor that actually believes and understands that there is a better way of doing things, right? And this is not necessarily about getting rid of jobs. This is about being smart about the way that work is going to be done in the future. And it's also about the first thing that we always work with people on, even still today, and it's something I drive across my 200 plus workforce when we are out working with partners and with customers. It's about the thing you have to do first is you have to change the way that people think about work. You cannot go into any organization and say, let's start talking about the way we're going to change work. You can't do that, because if they haven't changed their mindset about how they're looking at work, you can forget that next conversation. They have to actually believe, and they have to actually want to change the way they think about work. Work isn't going to be the same. And if this pandemic experience hasn't nailed that home, you can just look at all the companies in the world right now that have done all this offshoring and had done all these business continuity plans and basically have all gone for naught, right? So there's so many things that make this such a timely type of discussion, and it makes that whole little mantra that we've used, that I've used and my teams have used for years, which has been around, you have to start with change the way people think about work, then they can start changing the way we're going to affect and effectively change work. So when we work with finance, when we accomplish task number one, change the way they think about work, then we can start going in and start looking at, so tell me what you do. And normally we can decompose the finance department very, very easily because we've seen it 100 times. And again, using the basic nomenclature that we've seen in most finance companies, we know the kinds of work that they're doing. They may do it slightly differently. They may do it different rhythmically. They may do it, the scales may be different. And they may have certain specialty kind of reports and things that they do. But again, there's certain just very, very bog standard and a process nomenclature. At level 1 and 2, they do the same kinds of things. At level 3, where you start getting down in the detail-y work, and the way that they do it starts to differentiate. And then when you get to levels 4 and 5, which is the very finger on keyboard levels, yes, that may be different because one's on PeopleSoft Finance, other one's on SAP Finance, and so on. So these are where we start getting into the differences. The common things that we go in and look at very, very easily that fit for automation or RPA automation is anything where you're doing go get, go send. And again, we always have to be, if you don't have workflow and you don't have these kinds of things, then yes, RPA is really being jerry-rigged, if you will, or made to be your workflow platform. Now, is that what they're really made for? No, but it can certainly do that. It's just like a human can go get a report or can go send something by taking it to you. But that's, again, not optimal use. But again, you can use the digital worker to do that. But give you examples very specifically. I'll tell you a short story about a very specific case that we did at Bank New York Mellon. And it was with one of our teams, our finance teams in Bank New York Mellon in India. We had offshored about 200 FTEs worth of work, actually a little bit over 200 FTEs worth of work. Primarily what this team was a massive reporting team. They did all kinds of reporting. And so it was one of the asks, after we'd been doing a lot of work, we probably spent close to 2 years of doing most of our work was in operations. And then we decided it was a good time to start federating out and expanding out into new areas. And we were in a centralized COE. And so I started taking some of my resources and dedicating them, even though they still work for the central team, they would be dedicated in and start working on inside of other divisions. And of course, with my friend Todd, the CFO, he was all, come on, can you guys help us automate stuff? I want to use some of these robot things. And I said, absolutely. Because he said, I know we've got lots of things we should be able to automate. And I said, absolutely. We went in. And I said, reporting's an easy one, Todd, because it's this, and this. So we had a team come out, our India team that worked we had a COE in India as well. And so we had our Lean Six Sigma guys working with our developers for robotics go together, and they started decomposing the entire reporting team. What was there? What did they do? How they do it? And they mapped out 22 different reporting teams and how they did their work. And they had all up in a big war room, as you can imagine. They had all the process maps out, and they had all these circles up about areas where they think they got. And they kept stepping back, and so they had to do a report out to me 1 month when it was time to make decisions about what we're going to automate. And they said, Jeff, listen, but we could automate like this one and this one, but we're only getting like 0.25 FTE worth of value. We're getting 0.3 FTE worth of value. We're getting 0.4 FTE. So we're like automating little bitty pieces of this when we're looking horizontally across all the processes. So there's 22 of these. So when you add it up, it was like 4 FTE worth of work, but you couldn't really extract any value out of it because it's like you still need the whole team together. So you're just freeing up, like I'm freeing up 4 hours out of an entire team for a week. I mean, it was ridiculous. It wasn't even worth doing. And so I was in the war room, and this is another one of those things that sometimes a different pair of eyes bring you, right? So I'm sitting back and I'm looking at all the maps, and I noticed that there were 3 or 4 of them that were stacked on top of each other. They were literally laid out one after the other. So this is reporting team 1, reporting team 2, reporting team 3, and reporting team 4. And the way that we did our maps, we had level 2, level 3 definition, and so they had it detailed out. So you could see the level 2, this is how they do it. Don't. And the level 2 process would only be about 5 to 7 steps, big or high level. Then level 3 decomposes that step into much more detail, right? So as I'm looking at that, I go, that's interesting. I look down, that's interesting. Guess what? All 4 of those teams had exactly the same level 2 steps. So I went, wait a minute, bring all those over the maps over here. I said, what step do they do in the second? What's their second step? And they started reading them to me. And I went, well, what's the third step? And what's the fourth step? And what's the... Every single one of the 22 teams had exactly the same level 2 process. Exactly the same.
And so it was easy.
Okay, how different is their level 3? So they went, well, I don't know, we never looked at that. And I said, okay, well, we can't do it now because, you know, I'm on video and they're in Pune. And I'm like, so here's what I want you guys to do. I want you to look at things vertically now. I want you to start going through and looking at each one of the level 2 processes. Just call them, these are processes. They really weren't, but they were. And each one of the level 2s, and see how much similarity and differences are there between the teams that way. Long story short, we created what we call vertical automation. By stacking on top the teams that have very similar activities going on, we've created vertical automations that they shared.
That's fantastic.
We basically compressed 22 teams into about 7 teams. They were, I can't disclose how many people were released, because that's confidential. The funniest thing was the supervisor was like, yes, that's fantastic. When we started the project, we were even going to be able to, he then looked at us at the end and we said, this is what we're going to be able to do. He said, what am I supposed to do with all the people? I said, that's what you get to talk to Todd about.
That's your new thing to solve through, right? That's your new thing to think through.
And of course, because of that, because in India there's a very different, they don't really have a culture of letting people go. I said, look, I'm sure Todd's got more things he's going to want to send to you anyway, more higher value added work. But I said, look at all the things that you now can do that you don't have to do anymore.
Oh yeah.
Because if you think about all the things that people do in reporting, well, one of the best things that we showed them, and was just eye-opening to them, they never even thought about, and trust me, these guys are super clever people, was that they would come in the morning. It was one of the craziest statistics I'd ever seen in my career. And I will admit that I've done a lot of work around finance, but I didn't really guess, it never really hit home with me when I think about how many people have the same thing going on within our bank, but all the banks in the world, and maybe a lot of banks are better than we are. They were on average spending 4 hours, on average now, 4 hours a day, just go get data, transform data, and then, because what they were doing is they'd go get the data out of PeopleSoft, they'd bring it back and put it in Excel, because you know Excel rules the world.
Yes.
Transform it, play with it in their own models, and then they put it back up into PeopleSoft. By the way, PeopleSoft has worksheets in it. They could have done it, but no, I have to do it in Excel. Then they put it back up into PeopleSoft to go ahead and do its own other things. They spend 4 hours just getting the shit ready. 4 hours to get the stuff ready before they actually do their value add work, which is, that's interesting, doing the color commentary around the reporting. They don't even get ready for their work day to start for 4 hours. That was all automated for them, by the way. And the way we automated it, so if they came into work at 8 o'clock in the morning, the digital workers did all of that first 3 steps while they were all sleeping.
No, that's fantastic. And that's the thing that I've been trying to, so there's a learning curve when you think robots first, right? They're all coming to take our jobs. And, really, when you look at the data, they've created more jobs than they've taken away so far to date. Yeah. Because it really is what you said earlier about getting into that kind of mindset. And the one thing that I keep, telling, that I've been learning too, and that I've sort of been, realizing, I'm actually on a panel, this Friday about it, is that the entire shift needs to be in everything from HR and talent acquisition and retention all the way through to the business unit. You're never going to have the strategic minds if you're continuing to hire the same kind of, number crunchers, because that's not necessary anymore. Why would you ever compete with the digital worker for accuracy? ever.
Right.
And to your point too, one of the things that clients often find funny, when we're going in and talking through how processes change when you have robots, is one of the steps is always that, that quality check. And it's like, oh, we can eliminate that one off of every single process because you don't have that risk anymore. And so many of my CFOs are very risk averse, as they should be. That's their job, right? And so it's really important to kind of disseminate that it's a bonus that you have a paper trail of everything that the digital worker did. It's not because it's in Thelma's head on how that macro that she busted out worked last week for the close, right?
Right.
We can really go back and kind of identify where things went and do continuous improvement if you're seeing how a digital worker does it. So I wanted to segue. I just took, pat on the back, Paula, I took my Blue Prism Cloud training. And I was absolutely fascinated. What a well done acquisition by Blue Prism. I did, like I said, I'll be the first to admit, I didn't know you guys, when that took place, but learning the story over the last few months, and then taking that training and understanding how that kind of organically fits into everything that you guys have been saying and the cultural values, I really wanted to touch on that for a minute. And the reason is and correct me if I'm wrong, but this was sort of my perception of it, or my take was, once I finished that training, what I saw Blue Prism Cloud as was autonomy for a business unit to take a handle of what they want to do automation-wise, and then have that kind of plug into the overall COE. In other words, you can hit the ground running with Blue Prism Cloud if you're a finance leader, and it comes with, kind of the ML and the AI, all these acronyms that we get confused by. You kind of have this all in one place with a handful of digital workers to get you started, to really just jumpstart, this automation journey that, by the way, if you're not on, you're already behind. So
Right.
what I thought made sense too was to get your take, for the CFO audience, from that perspective, how do you see Blue Prism Cloud giving autonomy to some of the business units, and maybe getting past some of the classic woes that we've had between business and IT in the past when it comes to implementations? I'd love your thoughts on that.
Yeah, look, it was something that we're extremely proud of, and we are reaping so many even unintended consequences, I think, from what we've learned from our new family members of cloud. And, I'm very honored to be, the recipient of owning now for the company the entire operational unit for Blue Prism Cloud. And Colin Bradford, who's the COO for cloud, is on my management team, and his entire staff is under my customer office organization. And they're brilliant guys, they really are. And the product that Terry Walby, the CEO and founder, and his vision for what they've created, it's the first true SaaS offering. It's the only true SaaS offering right now that you can actually have in the RPA space. It's a brilliant combination of Blue Prism as the base digital worker platform with the complete Azure offering of cognitive services, as you've already described. And you can use as much or as little as you want, all you can eat. You can plug other things into it if you want very easily, like Abby if you've got Abby as your OCR engine, you can plug it right in without any problems or issues. And again, I think, from our vision for Blue Prism, again, we're the only digital worker platform that has an on-prem, just a pure cloud where you can take your digital workers and put them in cloud, any cloud platform. And then you have a SaaS offering. We're the only one that has all those pure plays. And that has always been a part of our strategy. It was a heck of a lot easier to find somebody that had a high quality SaaS platform offering, like Terry did with autonomy. And so it was just been a fantastic marriage so far. It's also reaping benefits because they've built some very, very, just cutting edge technology to bolt onto that, which will soon be rolling out. And we'll talk about that at some point in the very, very near future this summer, that we're taking out of their cloud platform, and we're going to make it available for all of our enterprise customers that are using the on-prem version. Some very, very cool technologies. So there's a lot of advantages we've gotten out of that. And I think, as you already described, Paul, which I couldn't have done it any better, I'm going to be somewhat redundant. For a lot of customers, the beauty of what the way that the cloud platform is done is when you purchase cloud, you're already getting 5 digital workers. You're getting an entire team that is coming in and is going to basically deliver for you your first 2 or 3 automations. They're going to teach you by being with you on the ground, and they're going to help you put those automations and stay with you until those things are stood up and they're successfully implemented through your automation journey. That's exactly the way it should be done. And, again, they'll either do it themselves directly, because we're not a big consulting house, so we can't, get 1,000 installations in. Or we use one of our very, very highly qualified, highly certified partners, and we work with them and we certify them. We go through the QAs with them. So we trust them when we put them onto a project to follow the same standards that we hold very true to us from our professional services group. So you can again, if your automations only require just Blue Prism and you're accessing that because you purchased Blue Prism Cloud, it's not a problem. If you pull down services from Azure through their cognitive platform, it literally is just there. It is a true drag and drop. And again, we have a great relationship with Microsoft. They're constantly upgrading and we stay in touch with them. Everything we do, again, with the SaaS environment, as most know, when we upgrade, it's one and done. You don't have to worry about that. We take care of all of that. So all of those kinds of things, again, it makes it so much easier. And as we all know, everything's kind of going cloud. Now, some industries are going to be a bit behind that. I worked most of my life in highly regulated industries, but you also have defense and gov and some areas of gov. We've got pharma that's that way and others as well, insurance. So, some of the data now is being allowed to go cloud. Some's public, some's not. Again, so, there's all these things as well. But again, I think your description and how it's able to be used, I think for a company, and again, people ask, is it just for smalls or is it for the bigs? Is it for the mediums? My answer is yes. You can do both. We have companies now that are doing hybrid installations where they already have the enterprise on-prem version, but they're now buying cloud because they want to start building a cloud presence of Blue Prism. And they also want to take advantage of all of the AI components they get in a box when they buy the cloud component. They already know that we have our digital exchange, that is our digital app store that you can pull down thousands of artificial intelligence and intelligent automation platforms from our partners that we certify. And you can plug all kinds of things into our enterprise platform. This is just another way of doing it that's very seamless, doing it through Azure. So again, I can't, the guys that came up with the idea to acquire Autonomy and the timing we did it last year, and now we're in full stride. We're seeing growth, unbelievable growth in cloud right now, especially right now, given where we are with.
I've been asked. I was prompted to take. I mean, of course, because we are partners, and that's one thing I really actually admire. As an aside, how rigorous you guys are with partners for training and understanding your products. Because at the end of the day, if I'm telling the Blue Prism story, it better be as good as you telling the Blue Prism story. Otherwise, nobody's going to win, right? And that's absolutely one of the things when I finally was prompted is because I think you guys posted something on LinkedIn or something and it just went viral and it was trending on RPA and I'm like, hold on a second, I'm a partner. I've really got to take this training, and I did it. And for the kind of clients that I speak to and the kind of CFOs that I'm introduced to, it's such a light, digestible way to approach this. And it's just not daunting. And an implementation time, I mean, CFOs don't even believe me. Honestly, they're gonna have to see it to believe it. Once I get my first install, I'll report back. But in the next couple of weeks, I have 3 conversations about Blue Prism Cloud, and they literally cannot believe that this isn't like implementing a giant ERP system. Or I'm like, no. So I think there's a lot of implementation fatigue in the finance department. They've been subjected to all kinds of players along the way, and it is a very dense space if you think about it. IPA and IA, and I mean everybody has their their name in the hat somewhere, with all these letters, alphabet soup, so to speak. But really, the true players that are emerging are the ones that solve business problems. And to me, Blue Prism Cloud solves a business problem. And one of the things that it solves, I think, kind of by default, is answering the simplicity behind an implementation for those rookies. Because again, I can imagine, sitting in the shoes of a CFO right now, 2020, in the middle of a pandemic, going, I've got nothing automated. I probably should have picked up that phone when Blue Prism called me in December. I probably should have figured this out. And so when you're scrambling, to me, you're already behind, but hey, there's hope. There's an all-inclusive SaaS, put it in, build it, ready to go. And I think that's fantastic. So one of the things I just wanted to kind of wrap up with, and thank you so much for your time, Jed. I really appreciate
Absolutely.
it. This has just been so entertaining and so informative. But one of the things, that we hear all these buzzwords in our space, right? Like tons of buzzwords. And my favorite one right now, which I think has lost its value, is finance transformation. And it's just this nebulous term at this point. And to what you said, all these folks that had done their shared service centers offshore, had done their outsourcing plans, gotten everything ready to go. Well, that's still not going to solve, unforeseen things and acts of God, right? We're seeing that today. So what would be, and I guess we're going to be stuck with that word, right? It's a hashtag at this point, finance transformation. But when thinking through a transformation, I'd like to hear what you'd say is the crucial, must have piece in a finance transformation, to have success. What is it that an objective should be, when you're approaching a finance transformation, and what kind of check marks make it a success versus a failure?
Wow.
I know it's a loaded question, but I really think it's important, because I think we say finance transformation, and really all we're doing is little tasks. And to my point, if you're doing process improvement and continuous innovation and reevaluating how you're working, by default, you're in transformation mode at all times. So to me, I think we need to abandon this idea of let's sit down and have a finance transformation talk, and just realize that we have to get better every day as organizations. Otherwise, we're gonna cease to exist. Your thoughts?
Yeah, I guess I go way back when I was a very young managing director at General Electric, and this was when General Electric was actually a powerhouse under Jack Welch, and many have their own opinion about Jack and what he may have set up, which may have led to the demise of the company, and that's a conversation over great wine and cognacs and those kind of things, because unless you were there, you are only sitting on the sidelines casting stones or waving a flag, depending upon which side of that argument you want to be on. For those of us that were there, we learned a lot of very valuable lessons, and a lot of those I still carry on with me today, both as a leader and a manager, but also in my personal life. And one of the things I think I've grown up in this world of transformation. I was one of the original 26 quality leaders in GE when the Six Sigma things were launched. It helped shape a lot of the things that I think about and the way that I look at business, the way I look at people. We are always going to be changing, and if we don't change, then you've heard the old adapt or die scenario. But we're always going through change, and organizations, as you could see what happened to GE, they didn't. And it's an unfortunate thing. The problem that we're seeing, and you've pointed out the anxiety, what you're sensing or you're feeling about this word transformation. It's because you will be hard to find an organization that is truly transformed. If you look up the definition of transformation, it is a metamorphosis from something that was to something that is new, and that's not what happens. Most organizations move incrementally, and that's what they consider a win. And I think what I've always done in my career as the transformation leader or head of transformation for organization is the very first thing is begin with the end in mind. And that's a Stephen Covey 7 Habits. if you don't truly understand what good looks like at the end of this. Who cares what we call it? I don't care what we call it. I really don't. But if you tell me what it is that the end looks like, and we're going to measure in different elements, by the way. We're going to have different perspectives, and we're going to use different lenses to measure that. Because throughout that transformation or change journey, things are going to happen along the way that's going to change the destination point. This would have never been planned, what we're in right now today. C19 was never ever planned. We have hundreds and hundreds of customers that are on transformation journeys. This was never in their transformation journey plan, and I promise you, those plans and those end states have all now changed in some shape or form, or variable or lenses that they're measuring the end state for that journey to end has now changed. The destination point no longer is California. The destination point now is Dallas, Texas. Why? Because they've had to adapt to this environment or they die. They're going to get stuck going across from there to Texas to Nevada, and they're going to get stuck in the desert and they're going to die because C19's affected all their provisions. And so they're not going to be able to make that journey. So, it's really important that, one, you begin with the end in mind, and two, you make sure that you plan these journeys, these transformations to be incrementally adaptable and flexible so that you can change as you come across things that you're going to learn and things that you're going to become exposed to as you go across. I thought we were going to use automation anywhere at Boney. I had no idea even who Blue Prism was. And I'm so thankful that I allowed myself not to be influenced by my own experiences and my own personal bias. And I let things that I became aware of and other people to help me make a better decision. And so again, that's really, really important. So there's never going to be one right recipe. There can only be the recipe that you craft for your organization, your culture, and for the time that you're basically in. And as long as you allow yourselves to take that ability to give yourselves flexibility to make the plan so that it can morph and change along the way, and keeping your eye on the end state, you'll be very successful in what you deliver. And I think, again, we don't often do that because we fix something very hard at the end, and come hell or high water, that's what we're going to get to. And that's why you don't see very many organizations really ever transform themselves.
No, I agree. I think that was beautifully summed up. And I think the takeaway, one thing I've just been kind of thinking in my head throughout all of this too, is you got to pivot or perish. It's really that simple. You and I were supposed to be in New York City this morning. This panel was supposed to be taking place at blank Rome. And here we are, videoing each other, and figuring out how to help our clients through this. And I think the really important thing is to make sure that we all realize that unprecedented things will happen. They might not look this dramatic, but it's really important to have a plan in place that is nimble, flexible, and to your point, can be pivoted so that you're always thinking of how do I get to that end place, even if the direction or the map kind of gets janky along the way. So I agree wholeheartedly. Well, those are all the questions I had for you today, Jet. I really appreciate your time. Did you have any last key takeaways or anything you wanted to share with our CFO friends before taking off?
Well, I think the only other piece of the recipe about transformation, and it's something, again, that I've learned over my years, is that the two elements that it takes from a personality perspective is you have to have courage to make that decision to do change. And then it takes tenacity to stay with it, because it's not going to be easy. And, that's the other piece that fails. We often see leaders that have the courage to stand up and make the big speech, right? To do the rah-rahs. This is what we're going to do. My challenge has always been and I've seen a number of times where the leadership then begins to wane as you get into the nuts and bolts of grinding through past that first year, which is the easy year, by the way. It's getting into the second and third year where it really gets to be where fatigue sets in, where you're halfway out in the middle of that journey and you're like, oh, wait a minute, do I turn around and go home,
Yeah.
Or do I just keep plowing ahead? And that's where tenacity comes in. And that's why, again, I think so few actually see their way through. And if you have that tenacity, I think those that have made it through will tell you that it was well worth it. That what they learned about themselves, what their organizations learned about themselves, what the people that came with them on that journey learned was well worth anything that they had to put up with to get through it. So having the courage to make that first, yes, we're going to do this, and having the tenacity to stick with it is something that's really important once you set. What's the end game going to look like?
Mm-hmm. No, absolutely. And then all roads lead to that, and get a good partner along the way too, and you'll get there faster. Well, thanks so much. Thanks so much, Judd. I appreciate it. And I hope that we can have some real in-person, conversations sometime soon.